Welcome back, everyone, to the next installment of Chaos Child. Things got really scary last time, but we have the police officer Shinjo here, and I guess someone else in the background.
死亡したのは柿田博則22歳。渋谷在住のフリーターで、更新でマーケティングのアルバイトをしていたようです。
Koshin, what is that? A venture capital company located in Shibuya that participated in the post-earthquake reconstruction business. After using massive amounts of money to monopolize the construction companies involved in the reconstruction, they've moved on to other projects, such as the introduction of new infrastructure, i.e., the deployment of high-powered security cameras around the city. They've also taken the lead in supplying business models and partnership opportunities to various nonprofits and volunteer groups, and in helping establish self-sufficient communities among the survivors. In the process, they made vast amounts of money. Some earthquake survivors and residents claim that they're a brutal, tyrannical company that does not hesitate to use evictions and eminent domain to take property they want.
更新でバイト？恋人は？
いません。同居人もなし。一人暮らしだったようです。
くそ。
Shinjo cursed. If he was single and not in a relationship, it would take time to figure out his private life. And Koshin was one of the companies that had profited the most from the recovery projects in recent years. Part-timer or not, if he worked there, he was probably pretty busy. It was possible that his co-workers knew just his name and nothing else about who he was outside of work.
新庄さん、マスコミへの対応どうしますか？海洋見テレビやニコニアのネット記者が引き下がらなくて。
それから現場にいた例の子たちですが、壁標の新聞部と言っていた2人、状態は落ち着いたみたいなんですが、やはりところどころ要領を得ません。
Okay, so we're just around.
もう一人の女の子も身元を示すものを何も持っていなく、柿田の交友関係、親戚筋から洗っていますが、まだ当たりません。こっちは完全黙秘です。
So that other girl was alive. Huh.
あと、先ほど検視の方から問い合わせが。
待て、勝手に。
ニコニアニュースの渡部です。すいません。一体何が起こって？
Nikonia News. A news site offered by Nikonia that offers information on a number of topics. It consists primarily of summaries of articles written by various groups and individuals, but lately it has put resources into having its own journalists do original reporting as well.
出て行け、許可なく入るな。
一言お願いします。
Shinjo's men physically dragged the reporter out of the room. He had to stop himself from putting his hands to his head and moaning. He couldn't let his men see him acting weak. Shinjo had been with the Police HQ Section 1 for less than 7 years. He didn't get along with his superiors, but he managed to beg his way into being in charge of this case. Maybe this was his way of avenging the death of an older detective who he'd admired. Whom he'd admired?
窓枠の鑑識が終わったら、すぐに外から見えないようにしといてくれ。あのネット記者は最近何するかわからん。
はい。
検視は俺が直接対応する。それから会社の仕事周りへの人数を増やしてくれ。上には後で俺から言っておく。
はい。それで例の子たちは？
それも俺が持つ。じゃ、よろしく頼む。
はい。
His men raced out of the room. They'd never had a case like this before, and they were probably pretty excited. So was Shinjo, to be honest. The whole thing was such a mess that he didn't even know where to begin, but his detective's instincts were screaming at him to start doing the work needed to find the killer. By the way, note that we are continually referring to Shinjo in the third person, so even though we're kind of focusing on him, we are still the students.
Yoshi.
It's Takeshi Shinjo.
はい、信用調査会社フリージアでございます。
His call was answered on the first ring, like always.
俺です。
あら、新庄ちゃん、遅かったわね。もうちょっと早く連絡が来ると思ってたけど。
あ、すいません。
Shinjo apologized without thinking, and for no clear reason. He always felt like a naughty child when he spoke to the CEO, who happened to be a woman.
現場の面倒をちゃんと見てるから苦労すんのよ。少しはあの人みたいにチャランポランで行きなさいな。
先輩の性格まで見習うつもりはありませんよ。
真面目だわね。いつまでも真面目が美徳だと思ってると痛い目見るわよ。
百瀬さん、そんなことより相談したいことがあるんです。
Shinjo cut her off before she could continue her lecture and gave her a brief description of the scene. This was a violation of the rules, but the only way to solve a crazy case was to be a little crazy yourself. That was the first thing he'd learned from that older detective.
それって殺人なの？自殺なの？
Momose asked her a question after he described the situation. She cut to the heart of the problem.
現状ではそれがわからないんです。
The hotel had gotten suspicious when Kakita had never come down after checkout time. When more than 10 calls to the room went unanswered, they'd contacted the police. 2 officers as well as someone from the hotel had gone to the room and found the body and an unconscious girl. 1 officer stayed at the scene to keep it secure, and the other searched the hotel to make sure it was safe. So that officer was killed? The first one, that is. During the search, he'd forgotten to lock the employee entrance in the back near the stairs. That was how the 2 students from Heikiho had got in. Shortly after he'd left the room, the girl woke up and started strangling the officer who'd stayed. Oh? He'd hit his head on the edge of the glass window and knocked himself out. So he's alive? He was going to be fine, but he'd been out cold until backup arrived. Wow, so we only found 1 dead body then, shockingly, and not 3. When the backup got there, they found the girl unconscious on the floor. A boy from Heikiho was passed out on the floor too. The other girl from Heikiho was throwing up, also on the floor. Oh my god. Kakita's cause of death was asphyxia via strangulation. The wire around his neck was a kind used at construction sites. Yeah, they were thick cables. It had been hung in an X pattern from the lights on the ceiling, and he'd been sitting on the bed as it rotated. That's why there was so much pressure on his neck. Then finally, his head had been severed. And it bonked the freaking kid. From the estimated time of death, Kakita had passed away before the police had even been contacted. The body on the bed had kept spinning in time to the music, 1 rotation every 2 minutes. In the end, the man's head had been cut off completely. The problem was the girl in the room. There was no indication that she'd ever touched Kakita. There were no fingerprints or any other signs that she'd touched Kakita's body, the bed, or the wire. The only things they'd found under her fingernails were skin and blood from the officer she'd strangled. In fact, there was no indication she touched much of anything in the room. Everything they found belonged to Kakita, and according to the officer she'd strangled, when she'd attacked him, she'd clearly been in an unstable psychological state. Her eyes are bloodshot and out of focus.
つまり何？その女の子は柿田って男が死ぬのを黙って見ていて、部屋の中のものにほとんど触れず、混濁した意識のまま警官に襲いかかって首を絞めたと。
I'm assuming Kakita killed himself thinking he was doing something other than that. I don't know how she just sat there the whole time, though. Unless she was under an illusion and then snapped back into reality to see that he killed himself. I don't know. Shinjo scratched his head as he heard her sum up the situation. And what's up with the magical door locking and unlocking? That was what it looked like, at least from what they knew right now. And just going by that, it sure looked like a suicide. But it was all far too strange.
なるほど。厄介だわね。現場に入り込んだっていう壁砲の子たちは？
ショックが大きかったようで、最初は何も喋らなかったんですが、今は少しずつ話し始めています。ですが、いろいろと問題のある壁砲の子ですから。
That place has some issues. He checked with the school and verified that they were part of the school's newspaper club. The security camera at the rear entrance had seen them coming in, which matched with their testimony. But he didn't know what to make of their testimony that the door had opened on its own, or that someone else had tried to come into the room. The door was equipped with an automatic lock, and the only person inside the room who could have opened it was that girl. Who then went back and lay down, face down, But there was no sign of her fingerprints on the door. And the security camera in the hallway showed no signs of anyone else trying to go in. In any event, it was extremely rare for a civilian to see a dead body outside of a funeral. And in an unstable mental state, it was extremely easy to imagine things or just outright be mistaken about what was going on. If they turned out not to have any relationship to Kakito or the girl, he planned on letting them off with a stern warning. A very stern warning.
結局のところ、一番大きな手がかりは部屋に潜んでいたその子なんですが、何も喋りません。
そのままだと非感知よね。
Psychiatric hold. The act of keeping someone in custody in a designated location, such as a mental hospital chosen by the police, until their psychological state has normalized.
はい。そうなると大幅に捜査が遅れることになるので、そうしたくないんです。
わかったわ。ちょっと情報を回させてちょうだい。多分、新庄ちゃんの立場的に無理してもらうことになるから、覚悟はしといてね。3分後にこっちからかけ直すから。
Yeah, this will be rough for us, because we're not supposed to let this information out, but we're doing it intentionally.
あ、助かります。よろしくお願いします。
Shinjo went to hang up the phone.
ちょっと。
はい。
そういえばお願いがあるのよ。絶対に新庄ちゃんのためにもなることなんだけど、聞いてくれないかしら。
So it was basically an order then, Shinjo thought to himself.
何ですか？
この件に関して、私より詳しいうちの子が一人いるのよ。それで、今回の現場を直接見たいって言ってるんだけど、お願いできない？
That's a breach.
部外者を現場に？
いつだって物事を解決するヒントを与えるのは部外者よ。
After all, I'm an outsider too, she continued. In his head, Shinjo went over the steps he'd have to take and the time required to take them.
明日、いや、明後日で構いませんか？
さすが新庄ちゃん、話せるじゃない？よくそれで堅物揃いの捜査一課に残れてるわね。
では、よろしくお願いします。
ちょっと新庄ちゃん。
He barely stopped himself from ending the call.
まだ何か？
念のためアドバイスをしとこうと思って。2つね。言っておくけど、さっきのは冗談じゃないのよ。
は？
チャランポランで行きなさいっていうやつよ。これから間違いなく新庄ちゃんの理解の外にある事件が続くわよ。その時、一番邪魔になるのは常識だから気をつけなさいな。
Interesting.
肝に銘じます。
Your worst enemy is what you think you know.
そこで真面目に返事しているようではまだまだね。もう一つはね。
Momose paused for a second and chuckled.
うちの子に取って食われないようにね。油断してると新庄ちゃんが部外者になりかねないわよ。
September 30th, Wednesday.
なあ、スイポ見た？
ああ、壁砲ボットのネタ画像でしょ。でっかいウーパがドヤ顔して光るように座って渋谷も変わったとか言ってる。
Hekiho Bot. A Twitter account followed by over 80% of Hekiho students. It's popular for its variety of tweets, which include funny memes, news about discounts at cafes and restaurants near Hekiho, school rumors, and other things of interest to the student body. Despite the word bot designating an automated posting program in its name, it doesn't post at regular times, and its posts vary in content, so it's thought to be an actual account run by someone at school. And Upa, whoops. Ah, rats. I like that I can sort by acquired. Man, that makes my life easier. And it's alphabetical, which is amazing. A ball-shaped mascot, I knew it! Character from the popular manga Rainet Kakeru, which began running in Roku Roku Comics in 2006. The anime version only increased its popularity, and large amounts of merchandise such as stuffed animals followed. I don't know if this is a real thing or not, maybe it is, but Either Upa or Opa was a thing in Steins Gate. Like little merch you could get.
そうそうめっちゃ切なそうなのあれさ文化祭で使うね渋谷復興の歴史の展示なんてどうせ誰も見ねえじゃん
画像だけじゃ弱くない？なんかぬいぐるみとか実際に置かないと。
The male student started to search through Shibuya's stores with a smartphone. He must have found something strange because he kept mumbling, "No way." Now we're back, we lived. Ito was recording the newspaper club's project for the festival, a bunch of random footage of the preparations, in the cafeteria.
そんなもんで盛り上がってる場合かっての。
A body had just been found in Dogonzaka yesterday, and all those students cared about was their stupid jokes. The body was found less than 10 minutes away from the school, but they barely even mentioned it.
ま、確かにまだ大掛かりには報道されてないけどさ。
The first reports had been on a major communications company's website. That was where Ito had seen it. It had been last night. It had made the morning news and the morning papers, but all that had been reported was that a body had been found, and that no details were known. And it was rare for a high school kid to check the TV news and papers every day. There was no word from Miyashiro. Ito was really worried about what had happened at the Love Hotel, but he had no way of asking about it. He took out his phone even though he knew he hadn't gotten any calls. Sure enough, there were no messages. He'd been doing that a lot since yesterday. He couldn't bring himself to make a call. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to say to a friend who'd been taken away by the police. The laughing students irritated Ito in a way that he didn't really understand. He'd been planning on videotaping the entire cafeteria today, but instead he gave up and left. I like that he's using like a modern camera and a smartphone, but it says videotaping. Like that's even a thing anymore. He went inside the club room and saw Kurisu was there.
連絡は
Kurisu's expression clouded for a moment as she shook her head.
あれからは何も。
そっか。
Wakui, the club advisor, had told him that Kurisu had taken a change of clothes from Miyashiro to the police station last night. She'd been told that neither Miyashiro nor Onoe were hurt. The police were probably going to let them off with a warning, and if they weren't suffering any after effects of the trauma, they'd be let go in the morning. But school was over, it was almost evening, and there was no word from either of them. Ito dropped into his chair.
たく、学校のみんなは平和なもんだよ。昨日のことなんてほとんど誰も話してないんだぞ。
そう。
そりゃあ東京じゃ発表されてるだけでほぼ1週間に2人のペースで誰かが殺されてるんだから、変死体があったってだけじゃ別に真新しくもないけどさ。にしたってな、道玄坂なんてもろ近所じゃん。下手したらそこを通って投稿してるやつもいるかもしれないってのに。つかいるだろ、うちなら。あれかな、あいつがいつも言ってるみたいに社会に関するニュースを載せてるサイトとかにアクセスしないやつばっかりなのかな。
わかりやすいね。
Kurisu chuckled.
心配なんでしょ、二人のこと。
Ito started to speak, but then choked it back.
別に副部長こそ心配なんじゃないの？
Ridiculous, she chuckled.
怒ってる。処置なしだもの。セリカはともかくとしてね。忠告も聞かずに突っ込んで無茶するからこんなことになる。
I guess I should have reread that as ridiculous, she chuckled.
伊藤君にも新聞部の文化祭の映像押し付けることになるし。
いや、別にそれは大したことないからいいんだけどさ。
ダメ。与えられた役割はきっちりこなすのが当たり前でしょ。
ここか。クルス、予算の件どうなってる？
Kawahara appeared. He was very out of breath.
予算？
超過した予算をまとめたやつ。経理がまだかって。
Kurisu frowned as she realized her mistake.
ごめん、すぐにメールでまとめて送るから。
なるはやで担当の教師が帰っちゃう前に。
Kawahara ran off before Kurisu had time to answer. And before he was even out of sight, Kurisu had booted up the PC and started to tap at the keys.
何？
いや、別に。
Which of us is more obvious? That's what Ito was about to say before he stopped himself. Normally it was impossible to imagine Kurisu not doing her job. For a while after that, Kurisu focused intently on her work. Ito didn't have much else to do, so he watched her. When he looked carefully, he could see small dark spots under her eyes. She probably hadn't slept. And then Ito realized, for the first time, Kurisu had probably come to the club room to see if either of them had contacted him. With all the preparations that were going on, there was no other reason for her to be here.
なんとまあ、あの女帝がね。
Kurisu pressed down hard on one final key as she finished her task. Then, suddenly, an unpleasant sound filled the room.
なあ。
That was Kazuki, just adding her,
わかってる。
They looked over and saw that Kazuki was nibbling on dried squid as she played her game, oblivious to everything around her. Ito had seen her come in after Kurisu had started her work. He'd thought she might say hello, but knowing her, maybe not. He'd also seen her start to play her game. He'd been trying not to bring it up, but that was clearly impossible now. She must have been concentrating pretty hard, her gaze was constant and steady. Ito sighed.
こいつはいつでもマイペースだな。他人に興味がないのかね。
そんなわけないでしょ。この子は他の人よりほんの少しだけ自分が強いの。
にしたってよ。
She's in the same club as them, he started to say, but Kurisu stopped him with a raised hand. She looked down at Kazuki's game screen.
そうでもなかったみたい。
Kurisu chuckled and took off Kazuki's headphones.
カズキ、私はゲームやらないから詳しいことはわからないけど。この家の壁に向かって延々と火の玉出してるのは何か意味があるの？すごい勢いで燃え広がってる。
Maybe that's a hint she misses us too, because she's, like, making terrible shots and not fully concentrating, even though it said her gaze was steady. Kazuki looked back at the screen with a stunned expression on her face. She yanked the headphones out of Kurisu's hands and quickly put them on and started to pound at the keyboard.
落ち着きなさい。というかその煩わしいスルメ、飲み込むか出すかしなさい。行儀悪い。
Kazuki may or may not have heard her because she struggled with her game for a while and then... She froze like a toy whose batteries had run out. The squid she'd been chewing fell out of her mouth and landed on the desk. She stared at it for almost 30 seconds as if something impossible had happened. Then she silently stood up and staggered over to the shelf where we kept the electric coffee maker. Wait, now it's we? I guess if it's applying to everyone it makes sense, but the first person made me think we were back. Her face had turned pale. What?
カズキ、大丈夫か？コーヒー入れてくれるのか？
Kazuki nodded in answer to Ito's second question and started to make coffee with shaking hands. She made Kurisu her usual with 2 cubes of sugar and gave Ito a coffee mixed with milk, but then she made a cup for herself black, but didn't drink a drop. Her forehead slammed into the desk with a thud, and she became so quiet it was impossible to tell if she was breathing.
ね。
Kurosu looked up to Ito for agreement as she cleaned up Kazuki's squid.
いや、そうか？
He took a sip from his coffee, not sure what to think. What, she'd also just been here all night or something? To him, none of this made any sense. Kurosu didn't say another word as she drank her coffee.
と。
Ito looked up at the blank ceiling and decided that this was as good a time as any to ask. It wasn't that it was wrong, but it still felt kind of awkward.
さ、
何？
あいつがこんなに事件に入れ込んでるのって、何か理由があんの？
Kurosu froze. She lowered her gaze as if searching for answers in her coffee cup.
伊藤くんこそ、ずいぶん事件に対して熱心じゃない？
She seemed to be trying to change the subject.
俺はこういうのが好きな人だから。
こういうの？
猟奇的な事件。でも、昨日みたいに現場に忍び込むっていうのは。
That was going too far, he continued. Kurosu silently took another sip of her coffee. She seemed to be staring at a single point in the distance, lost in thought. It was clear that while she was seeing the things around her, none of them held any meaning to her. Looking at her scared Ito a little. Was it really that big a deal?
別に言いたくなければ。
そういうわけじゃない。きっと基本的には伊藤くんと同じ。タクルも好きだもの、こういうの。それに、危なっかしいところに首を突っ込みたがるのも昔からだし。
I see, Ito said.
小学校からだっけ？あいつが副部長と一緒に暮らすようになったの。
ええ。正確には被災して少し経ってからだから、中学生に上がるか上がらないかの時だけど。
Kurosu and Miyashiro were both what people called earthquake orphans. They'd both been in 6th grade when they lost their parents to the earthquake. Since they had no relatives to take them in, they'd been sent to the same group home, the localized small-scale children's welfare facilities, Aoba Dormitory. Small-scale children's welfare facility with a max capacity of up to 6 children, also called group homes. These facilities are often the homes of private individual families and are said to be able to offer more personalized care for the children. Kids like them weren't common in Shibuya these days, but they weren't exactly rare either. Miyashiro had been so badly injured during the earthquake that he'd been put into a coma. He was still in that coma when he arrived at the dorms. The head of the dorm was also the head doctor at the Aoba clinic downstairs, and so for a while that was where he was kept. Kurosu had taken care of literally all his needs. There were 4 kids at the facility. Kurosu and Miyashiro were the oldest. Since her birthday was earlier than his, she dubbed herself the oldest of the 4 siblings and volunteered to take care of the other 3. Even back then, Miyashiro had a habit of being curious and getting into trouble.
だいたい天の弱だしね。みんなとは違うってよく言ってるでしょ。そんなことはないのに。
She spoke like a parent worried for her child's future.
でも結局、あの子は。
お疲れ様。おや、クルス君も来てたのか。
先生、連絡があったんですか？
The club advisor, Wakui, was quite relaxed as he came into the room. Kurosu quickly stood up and rushed over to him. He nodded and motioned for her to calm down.
ついさっきね。
大丈夫そうでしたか？
それはもちろん。ほら、伊藤君、すぐに体育館に行きなさい。
体育館？なんで？
軽音部が今からリハーサルをするって。いい文化祭の記録になるんじゃないかな。
Kurosu's expression froze, and suddenly it changed.
涌井先生？連絡って それですか？
んそうだよ。ってなんだいクルス君、機嫌がいいね。
先生には機嫌がいいように見えますか？
Oh god.
行ってくる。先生も行こう。
ちょっと。
Sensing a gathering storm of violence, Ito pushed Wakui out the door. That punch sound. Kazuki had looked up, but now she slammed her head back on the desk. Now that she was all alone, Kurusu took out her phone and checked it. There was no message, of course. She sighed and looked at the board. That incident yesterday at the Love Hotel? Whether it was murder or suicide, from the way Miyashiro and Onoe had looked when they'd been taken by the police, something had happened. Miyashiro had said it had something to do with the incident 6 years ago. Now that it had happened 3 times, there was no ignoring it. No, it was too dangerous. She couldn't let him get more involved in this. She thought back to Ito's question, about why Miyashiro was so interested in this case. Kazuki was still lying with her head on the desk. When she turned her head to the side, for some reason, she looked like she was enjoying herself. When Kurusu saw that, she suddenly lost her desire to drink the coffee. Apologizing in her mind to Kazuki, she decided to pour it out at the water fountain. She headed to the upstairs water fountain, which was usually less crowded. She found herself looking down at the gaps between the tiles, as the sound of her footsteps rang in her ears. She could tell that she was walking slower than usual. Essentially, Kurusu was lonely. She remembered what she'd said to Miyashiro when he woke up in the clinic.
クルスママ、名前で呼んで。家族なのに名字で呼び合うのはおかしいでしょ？
In the end, he...
あの子は特別が気取りたいだけなんだから。
She knew why, she supposed. The event that had caused him to leave the dorm was still bothering him. November 7th, 2009. I wanted water. I could still feel the sensation of the dead woman I'd touched when I'd fallen on my hands, and I wanted to wash it off. I wanted to wash my face, too. The wind from the flames had blown something small into my eye, and it itched badly. I was thirsty, too. Sarika was on my back, and she showed no signs of waking up. My legs were at their limit, so I forced my way through the crowd and sat down on a tire that had rolled nearby. It smelled like burning rubber. I didn't have the energy to apologize to the people I ran into, and they didn't have the energy left to complain. I slowly brought Sarika to rest on my knees and looked around. I saw an orange light. The light of the fires reflected off of many things. It was pretty, I thought, before I realized how inappropriate that was. For some reason, I started to count the bodies on the ground, not knowing if they were alive or dead. But in less than 5 seconds, I had gotten way over 10 and realized how futile it was. I stopped. Shibuya Station was utterly destroyed. The 107, only a few minutes away by foot, was ruined as well. 5 whole hours after the earthquake, the chaos had only increased. There were fewer people out walking, but I wasn't sure if that was because they reached safety, or simply collapsed from exhaustion. I saw someone carrying his own severed arm in a convenience store bag. I saw people ignore a barefoot woman as she cradled a baby whose head was smashed in. Some had outright given up on sanity and were flinging things into the fire. A group of middle-aged salarymen were dragging a young girl into the darkness. A young man went to join them. There was no other way to describe it. This was hell. Sarika moaned a little in my lap. I slapped her cheeks to wake her up. Her face distorted in agony. It was okay. She was breathing. She was okay.
これから代々木に向かうから。ほら、あの大きい総合病院。覚えてるだろう。昔冒険しに忍び込んだあそこだよ。
Instead of answering, she just moved her eyebrows a little. I swore and lifted her up on my back again. She didn't seem to be that badly hurt, but this kept happening. I read on Twitter that the general hospital in front of Yoyogi Station was accepting patients injured in the earthquake. I didn't know that it was true, but I had no choice but to go. It had to be better than the hell that was Shibuya.
死ぬなよ。
I yelled, unsure if Sarika could even hear me, and started walking. I just needed to get to the hospital. What? Not sure if still in flashback? No, we're back in the present. We're at home. I leapt up. I quickly glanced to the left and right as I tried to calm my racing heart. I saw that I was in my own bed. Whew. I felt exhausted. I also felt really thirsty. Maybe it was because I'd had the dream again. I searched around until I found the bottle of water by my bedside, took a gulp, and then grabbed the phone off my bed to check the time.
0時17分。もう日付変わってるのか。
It was around noon when the police had let me go from Shibuya Station with the warning. I'd gone home and gone straight to bed, so I would have been out for more than 12 hours. This was no good. Maybe I'd slept too long, or maybe I hadn't slept enough, because my head felt like it was filled with lead.
いや、違うか。
I put my hands up to the thin light that was coming through the window and checked their color. They were the same as always. There was no blood on them. Yeah, have fun with that. I felt a little like throwing up. I hoped another drink of water would help, but it didn't.
くそ。
I thought for a moment and then decided to turn on the room lights. I would keep those on for a while. I turned on the laptop. I ran a search for urge to vomit less than foods, drinks. The internet gave me page after page of results. What, ginger? Milk to coat your throat for when you do vomit? I checked a bunch of pages just like you're supposed to when you're looking something up.
生姜か。
Hey!
なら源さんからもらった葛根湯があるか。
Oh yeah. I'm suspicious of Gen. I looked under the sink until I found the kakonto powder, then poured it into a cup and added some hot water from the electric kettle. It had a strange smell, unlike anything I was used to. I took a sip. I could tell that my hands were shaking a little as I held the cup. God damn it all. It wasn't the first time I'd seen a body. I checked the phone again and saw that there were several messages from Sarika and Kurosu. I went to answer but stopped. They were probably still up, but I didn't feel like talking to anyone. It felt like the air I'd breathed in at the Love Hotel yesterday was still deep inside me, along with the cheerful melody of the music box and the red that covered my vision. I felt something strange in my cheek and put a hand up to feel it. It was a bandage. I'd gone to some kind of clinic at the police station where they put it on. They told me I must have hit my face hard on the floor when I passed out. Okay. Maybe that was the thud. I honestly thought though, like, could the head have just shot at him? That would have been freaking nuts. I was unlucky enough to scrape my cheek against a piece of the shattered glass. Thankfully it wasn't a big wound. It barely hurt at all. But it itched like hell. And each time it itched, the shock I'd felt came rushing back and quickened my pulse. The danger was long gone, but I still couldn't forget the terror. Had I almost been caught up in something horrible? No. I was fine. I was fine, right? I wasn't like everyone else. I wasn't an amateur. I'd gone through that hell I just dreamed about, and survived. Maybe having that nightmare again was good for me. I managed to force down the urge to vomit, then clicked away at the computer. I opened my computer's TV program, changed the channel to a news program, and watched it on my monitor. A few months ago, I'd bought a USB TV tuner off of a homeless guy who had no idea what it was worth. All it cost me was dinner at a local restaurant. Just like I thought, there was an article about the events 2 days ago. All they said was that a man's body was found in a Dogenzaka love hotel. They didn't say whether it was suicide, murder, or just an accident. There was nothing about the girl who'd been found at the scene, or about me and Sarika. I see. I'd never experienced for myself the gap between what happened at a crime scene and what was reported on TV, but it didn't really surprise me. These days, the internet was a lot faster at reporting things than TV. To people who followed the news online, TV wasn't a place to learn new things. It was where you went to see if something you'd heard about was so important that it was getting TV coverage. I closed the TV program and opened a browser. Nikonia News has something on it too. I clicked on the uploaded video.
最近の渋谷では今回の件と合わせて3つの物騒な事件が発生しているんですが
Wait, Watabe? Was that the Nikonia reporter who got forcibly kicked out? Just like always, it was Watabe, the attention-seeking internet reporter. He was famous for charging it to— there you go, for charging it to crime scenes to get scoops. Lately, he seemed to be getting a little too cocky. He explained what had gone on at the Love Hotel as the video showed pictures that he had probably taken himself.
いずれにせよ警察は何か隠していると思います。ただ変死体を発見したとしか発表がなされていませんが、それにしては。
By the way, I'm just noticing, look at the bottom icon on the left side of the screen. Photo store element. Is it like Photoshop? And then, like always, he started to mix in his own subjective opinions with the news. He was right, the police were hiding something, but there was little point in listening to the rest of this. Vague information would just get in the way. The internet masses. What do they know? What does everyone else in the world know? I mostly ignored Watabe's voice as I looked at the video on the screen. Ugh. He must have gotten it by charging it to the hotel room. Yeah, I would not want to see those images again. I thought back to what had happened. A man was strangled to death in his room. There was an unconscious girl and a police officer there as well. The girl was the most obvious suspect. Even if she chose a strange way to do it, she still must have killed him, right? No, if she had definitely killed him, then they would have announced that. She was arrested just like I was. Over 30 hours had passed. Even if they'd found out she was innocent, they should have announced that. The police believe that the girl with him may know something and are proceeding with their investigation. Like that. Did the police think that she didn't do it? Then what was she doing in that room? And even if the police had told me during the interrogation that I'd imagined it, I knew what I had heard. Someone else had visited that room and knocked on the door. The sound was eerie and always had the same rhythm. I felt a cold chill and idly turned toward the door. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and end this installment on a positive comic relief note. My room was the same as always. There was no sign of anyone approaching it. I listened carefully to see if I could hear anything outside. Nothing. Remember, we still have not started the vision. Oh, okay. Time for goofiness. It was just one knock, right? Huh? I just heard a knock at the door, right? I couldn't believe it, but I'd forgotten to lock the door. I froze as it swung open from the outside. Someone was here. Who? I knew 2 people who would come in without waiting for an answer, but was it okay for me to just stand here? I gulped and spoke in a hoarse voice. Poking through the gap in the door was... Hooray! Someone I knew well.
よかった。起きてた。
Relieved, I staggered over and sat down on the bed. That hadn't done my heart any favors. For some reason, Sarika was standing at the entrance, fidgeting. She didn't try to come any further in.
どうした？こんな時間に女の子一人でここに来るのはあんまり良くないと思う。
I didn't think any of the homeless in this park were bad people, but someone who was hard up for money might attack her. Especially after what I had seen, I felt like I was going to start imagining things I didn't want to visualize.
タクは大丈夫？
何が？
昨日あんなことがあったから。
Honestly, not really. Was Sarika going through the same thing?
家に一人でいると昨日のこと思い出しちゃうんだ。それで怖くなって眠れなくて。
尾上。
ねえ、私一人でいるのやだな。今日だけでいいから泊まらせてくんない？
I know exactly how she felt. Just having someone you knew next to you was enough to make you feel a lot better. Take me, for example. Having Sarika here was letting me relax a little.
いいよ。
I'd have to sleep on the floor, I supposed.
ありがとう。
Sarika must have felt better when she heard my response because she looked like she was about to cry. She sat down right next to me on the bed. But why was she sitting next to me? There were other places to sit, but when I looked closer, I saw that her shoulders were shaking a little.
昨日のことが頭の中に焼き付いてて。
尾上。
It was natural, I supposed. Sarika was a girl and she was younger than me. Seeing something like that must have been a huge shock to her. Not for me, though. It was my fault for getting her caught up in this. As I started thinking about that, she put her head up against my shoulder.
タク、一緒にいて。お願い。
尾上はもっとずぶといだろ。
Of course, in reality, Sarika would never let me see her being that vulnerable, and she'd never actually come to visit. I don't know, man. I would make an exception tonight. That's freaking crazy. Was she okay, even if I wasn't? Maybe she was just fine. She was probably just dense. Yeah. I was really delicate, so in a sense I was jealous of her. Oh. Using a very different meaning of dense than I would typically use. Fair enough. I sighed a little and locked the door. So maybe there was no one at the door. That's right. Crap. It was a new day.
ネットの知識者はどうだ？
I quickly opened another site. Shibuya News. Shibuya News. This was the private news site I trusted the most. A program to bring you the latest in Shibuya news. I pray you spend tomorrow in a way you won't regret. It was always updated at midnight every day. The quality of the news and the reliability of its updates made it far more useful than TV or the mass market sites. Online news was faster than TV, but of course some sites were better than others. There was no end to the number of wrong-siders who would treat the net as a single entity that was the opposite of TV. The TV says one thing, but the internet says something different, they'd say. If you asked me, they were utter morons. These days, even a lot of the larger sites online aim for the same mass market the TV news did. It was critical that you find out for yourself which sites could really be trusted. Just like the name implied, Shibuya News dealt with the goings-on around Shibuya. It was similar enough to our newspaper club that everyone in the club knew about the site and used it regularly. Its owner, Kay, was... how to say this? Very skilled at getting and sharing information and seeing its effects. She carefully calculated when to send and when to receive information. A lot of child and grandchild sites used Shibuya News as their parent site. Most of them were privately run news sites as well. A site which is a primary source of information, secondary sites called child sites share this information with others, and there are tertiary sites called grandchild sites which share the information from the child sites. This lingo comes from news sites, and it's also common when running multiple sites to refer to the primary one as the parent site and the sites that were spun off of it as child sites. Hey! Trivia time! Primary, secondary, tertiary. What's the word for fourth? Time's up. It is quaternary. Anyway, back to the game. As a result, a huge number of people saw the information that Kay spread. To put it more unkindly, Kay was manipulating them. Anytime Kay wrote about a popular shop among high school students in Shibuya or a free smartphone app, I would hear people at school talking about it within a few days. Take, for example, the Twitter user that most of Hekiho Academy followed, Hekiho Bot. It described itself as a bot by Hekiho students for Hekiho students, but from the number of times it would show up on Shibuya News, my guess was that it was actually run by Kay. Kay was one of the few people I recognized as a right-sider. When something important was going on in Shibuya, first you checked the TV shows to get the basics, and the mass market sites to see what the net was saying. Then you would go to Shibuya News for the latest information. This was the way the newspaper club, and myself specifically, would always look for information. The quality of the news wasn't the only reason that Shibuya News was popular. One reason was that Kay appeared to be a girl. When someone was thought to be a girl in real life, they got a lot more hits than someone who was thought to be a guy. And the other reason was... Phantasm, a band? A gothic punk band that was popular in Shibuya around 2009. In 2015, it still has some passionate fans. A group of 4, but only the names of the vocalist, FES, and the guitarist Ryo, so Fez and Ryo, have been made public. Huh. This radio broadcast. Whenever there was something big she wanted to report on, she would always do an internet radio broadcast. It offered proof that she was a girl. Her voice calm and pleasant to the ear. A lot of people just listened to her broadcasts. The audio from the leaky noise case that I played for Kurosu had actually been modified by Kay to be easier to understand. I just really like the steel balls. They're so creepy. And the tall man, don't get me started. I chuckled a little. His glory hogging was a running joke among Nikoniya news viewers. Oh? They did mention 2009. The New Generation Madness, perhaps tied to Phantasm, sounds super creepy. But for now, it is time to stop the installment. Well, we certainly made a lot of progress today, didn't we? We came off of the horrible, horrible situation from the Love Hotel. It looks like we're starting to get over ourselves, but a lot of this installment was not actually following our protagonist, but rather the people around him. And something went down when we grew up in that orphanage that separated us from Kurosu. I mean, clearly there was a disaster, but why the insistence on referring to her by that name instead of how she chose to be called? I guess more will be revealed later. But otherwise, this band released music and creepy things happen? Is this the 1950s? Where our grandparents correct all along rock and roll's the cause of all this monstrous madness? I guess we'll have to find out. Until next time, everyone.